This is not a video that's necessarily going to make me popular. This is a video which is going to be about the history of events which have been much mythologized. Which, depending on your perspective and the version of events you have been realistically taught, or rather the emphasized version of events you've been taught, might much affect your perspective of what's going to happen. But one of the interesting things you learn when you start studying international relations and defense and deterrence and conflict management is that sometimes the smallest things can have the biggest impact, and the biggest things can notice completely. And also that people regularly believe what they want to believe. Britain declares war in August 1914. Why? Is it honour? Is it Belgian neutrality? Is it to maintain the balance of powers? It's a combination of all those things, ultimately. It really is. But realistically, there are some immutable parts of Britain's foreign policy which meant that she was pushed down that route. And what's really disturbing to look at in World War I is that all the powers can claim they pushed down that route to war because of the way they'd set up the alliances, but also because of the decisions they make. Because at a certain point, all of them have backed themselves into that corner. They've structured alliances with no thought for what the reality of those alliances mean. They've given blank checks with no thought for what a blank check realistically means. They've all overestimated their power to influence events and underestimated the need of them to be blunt in those events. Edward Grey, the British Foreign Minister, he speaks that the war that begun is the failure of a lifetime's work. He keeps looking for a diplomatic solution. He keeps trying to bring about a diplomatic solution. But honestly, whilst the British possibly could have brought a diplomatic solution, the fact is they started too late. They were too distracted by other events and not enough attention was being paid to what was going on in Europe. They had other issues. And because of those other issues, everyone else thought Britain wouldn't really do anything. And the really, really strange part is that those other issues actually ceased to be a problem at the beginning of the war for a certain amount of time because, yeah, the German obsession with keeping their Schieffelin plan, keeping to it because that was the only way they'd win, and they've created this plan, they've refined it, they're following it, meant they were going to do the one thing which could turn the British population from not hating the possibility of war. They saw it as not necessary. It's a continental issue. It's an assassination. It's a problem going on the continent. We don't need to be involved in that. To being something they actually cared about. There aren't people cheering war. Please do not get this wrong. There is a lot of mythology about people cheering war and it being over by Christmas. And even I occasionally use the phrase, oh, war will be over by Christmas. But the reality of that phrasing is it comes from roughly 3 years further on in the war, not at the beginning. It's not something they're saying in August 1914. Please do not misunderstand that in this period they fully understand the horrors about what they're about to unleash. This is a peer-on-peer conflict. A peer-on-peer conflict, and they know it. And there are many interesting points. You know, there's phrases, and we'll get into this, where the Kaiser believes, well, as long as Britain agrees to abandon everything they've ever promised and pledged to everyone else, but as long as they agree to abandon all their positions, we promise that we'll let things go back to how they were prior to the war, and we'll like it. And in return, there can be peace between us and Britain. You sit there and look at it and go, what kind of craven beast do you think you're talking to? But at the same, there is also similar British phraseology, as we get into, going to the Germans. Never have nations misunderstood each other so much, so willfully in this period as the Anglo-German relationship, and it is unfortunately upon the Anglo-German relationship that could have stopped this war. If Germany had taken Britain seriously when Britain said, "Don't do this, we don't want this kind of effort," and had not given a blank check to Austria, it would have been fine. But Germany didn't believe Britain really meant what it was saying, and Britain realistically has no faith in Germany backing down. And that's the problem. That is honestly the problem. And that combined with the fact that Britain probably would have accepted France getting its behind whooped and Russia getting its behind whooped. The relationship between Britain and Russia was not that great, and France, as long as they remain a great power with their empire intact, Britain will probably go, yes, and you got involved in this for what reason? But at the same time, Britain would not accept, under any circumstances, a German fleet coming down the Channel, or the German occupation or even utilising of Belgian space. Why? Is it because of treaties? Well, partially. But the thing is about those treaties is, why were they implemented in the first place? Why was Belgian neutrality, Belgian independence so important that there was a treaty about it? Because it was in everyone's best interest that Belgium remain Belgium, not part of anyone else. Because it grants a continental power too much power, and it puts Britain in too much weakness. Because of the position that Belgium occupies vis-a-vis tidal ranges and currents and the ability to actually invade the United Kingdom. And the thing is, everyone at the time knew this. There is no one in Germany who doesn't understand the British requirements over Belgium. There is no one in Belgium who doesn't understand that, or France, or Britain. But they choose to ignore it. They choose to believe, in fact, some of the German high command joke that the more British that are sent, the better. They'll take them out. They'll wipe them out. And then they'll keep on, and it'll stop them having to worry about them appearing elsewhere. It is 1914, when you look at it, should have been like the earlier crises. They had been solved through diplomacy. But this one isn't, because everyone fumbles it, and everyone just keeps going down that road. And for someone like me, who works in terms of a lot of my academic work towards the idea of conflict management, of conventional deterrence, of how you try and prevent conflicts, how you make diplomacy more likely to work, you have to always acknowledge that, yeah, you can lose. You will lose. Realistically, there are some situations which are Kobayashi Maru, to use that lovely unwinnable test from Star Trek. But, and I do mean but, there are parts of this period, of this timeline between June and August, where things could have been done which could, and I do say this strongly, could have had the potential to change the outcome. Things which could have been done to show the seriousness of intent, rather than the desire of intent. And again, it's always a balancing act, and it's very easy to see in hindsight. And I do say it's easy to see in hindsight. But the thing is, we can only learn by studying things from the past. We really don't want to recreate them in current times. So to be better informed and better prepared for the future, you have to look at the past. And that is what we're going to be looking at in today's video. We're going to be looking at the past. We're going to be looking at what exactly happened in this period. Now, of course, this isn't all the ministers in the government. This is not all of them. In fact, that's actually a wartime photo of Winston Churchill, looking quite so roguish, surrounded by female factory workers. We'll leave that to one side. This is the government of Herbert Henry Asquith, who is a nice man. I'm sure if he had been asked to describe himself, he would have called himself a nice man. He was a member of the Liberal Party. He was Prime Minister from 1908 to April 1908 to December 1916. He was highly educated. He'd been a successful barrister. He'd worked hard. But he was not a good crisis manager. He really wasn't. He was a one crisis at a time, and governments rarely have the joy of being able to deal with one crisis at a time. He also likes to lead by consensus, by bringing the cabinet together, by getting it to work together and all agree. And that's a problem when you're dealing with personalities this strong. Honestly, Asquith is a good man. I'm not going to debate that one. He is. Is he what you need as a leader? At this point, there is an argument there isn't anyone really in a position that you would want as leader at this point. Lloyd George, he's the Chancellor at this time, and he ardently believes in peace. He doesn't want to have war. And literally, he will abandon the French quite happily as long as no fleet turns up in the German fleet turns up in the Channel, and Belgium is not invaded. Frankly, he doesn't want to get involved in a European war. He has better things he wants to spend money on. He really does. We have then Sir Edward Grey, a hard-working diplomat, a foreign secretary par excellence who was losing his eyesight. He was losing it so badly he'd already been restricted in what he could do, but he was carrying on because there was no one better. There was no one better available. And that is a sad, sad thing to think about realistically. He will stay as Foreign Secretary until May 1915 and the forming of the coalition government. And then he will stay on through the first coalition government until eventually Lloyd George takes over. The man gives his entire life, his entire soul for his country to try and prevent war and then try and manage it. I have a lot of respect for him. I don't think, again, he was necessarily the person you want doing this role. Actually, possibly he is. But possibly you needed to have firmer messages and support coming from above him and around him. Because Churchill is in there as a representative of the majority of the cabinet. You see, for most of 1914 and most of July 1914, let alone June 1914, they are taking absolutely no notice of what's going on around them. They're all focusing on another issue. It's an important issue, don't get me wrong. It is a critical issue. But they have got tunnel vision to the point at which it causes trouble. And the fact that the Lord of the Admiralty, the First Lord of the Admiralty, is involved in the Ireland Commission at this point, when you consider all that's going on in the world, shows perhaps the fact that this government is not suited to the task it finds itself. Foreign policy has been left to Edward Grey. It is really being left to Edward Grey. There is no one backing him up. And to really illustrate that, in terms of what's going on, this government had in March lost their Secretary of State for War. Jack Seeley had been forced to resign because, well, after the cabinet had decided to agree something, then he had decided to add his own paragraphs onto it, and he'd allowed others to add paragraphs onto the cabinet dictate, which then got them withdrawn by cabinet and forced him to resign. And he serves throughout World War I on the front lines. He is an officer throughout. I have no doubt of his honour and his responsibility, but the fact he felt in any circumstance in this government that he could start adding on by unilateral action his own words onto a cabinet order, a cabinet, results of what the cabinet was laying out. That you're not supposed to do that. Maybe if the Prime Minister is signing off on it, you can do that. But the point of cabinet rule in the UK is if the cabinet has decided something, if the cabinet has promulgated a policy, that is the policy until cabinet changes its mind. Not until, well, it's my area, so I feel like I'm going to add in this bit, as I think it's a good idea listening to these people. I think it's a good idea to add in this bit as well. You might be right, but then you take the policy back to cabinet and you get them to agree to it. You don't do it yourself. But the Liberal government have been in power for a while. And frankly, they were starting to lose some of their way. They were starting to concentrate on infighting. And yes, the Conservatives are responsible for this in many ways, because the Conservatives were a bad opposition at this point in so many ways. And that is another problem with the British political system. It requires a good government and a good opposition, because a good opposition holds the government to account and forces the government to actually start thinking like a government. Whereas a bad opposition, which is no real opposition, the government tends to fall apart and start arguing with itself. This happens in every system. This is the role of opposition. When I am told by people, the opposition have no real role in the running of a country, they do. They hold the government of the day to account, and they manage to keep it working. Without them providing the external pressure of a very real threat to their ability to run the country by taking over in the next election, and without them holding to account the government decision-making, governments often fall apart because they are ultimately made up of individual humans. And especially under the British system, where they're individually elected by their constituencies, you can't get rid of someone that easily. You can dismiss them as a minister, but they're still in Parliament. They can still shout at you. You can withdraw the whip from them, but that's a big thing to do. And you get too happy with that, you end up with problems in your own party. You've got to have a better reason for drawing the whip from someone than they disagree with me on things. That doesn't work. It might be more viable today, but it certainly wasn't viable then, and it really isn't that viable today. It isn't. The Curragh incident is where some troops, officers, basically threatened to not take their troops to try and enforce home rule on the Unionists. You see, that's the problem in Ireland. There are the people who want independence and the people who want to stay as part of Britain. And both sides were armed. And realistically, the army didn't want to be used to enforce union on the nationalists. They weren't keen on that as an idea. There are some, of course, there's always some, but there aren't many who are that keen on that idea. But they also don't want to be going to force the Unionists to go with the Nationalists. Because the two factions are both armed. At this point, they look intractable. It's one of the interesting things. There's a great line in Massey's book describing a situation when, with the declaration of war and the statement from the nationalist leader that the British don't need to worry about having troops in Ireland anymore. No, they can withdraw them all to concentrate on Germany, as you know, and Europe, as you know, they will join together with their unionist preference to defend Ireland. And there's a huge round of applause, and the Unionists and the Nationalists are actually shaking each other's hands and being all chummy after this. And you sit there and go, it's a very weird situation. What's going on? It is often, when we look back in the past, we apply these neat lines to things. This is not neat line territory. This is very fuzzy history. This is human history. It's incredibly fuzzy. And the IRA sorting out Ireland, trying to chart a course in Ireland, has been taking up the full focus of the British government. To such an extent that the Kaiser honestly believes Britain would not do anything on Europe because they wouldn't realise it's happening. That their strength is sapped and their attention is sapped. So much so that he could conquer Paris and they wouldn't realise. Now that is hopefully hyperbole, but it's also indicative of what was going through the mind of the German leadership and how poorly the British were managing their messaging. And this is the point, this is the group from which the messaging is coming. Grey trying to put forward these words to try and bring about a conference, a six-power conference to sort out peace. This had been done before with the same ambassadors who were still in London as had been before, and he could do this. He could bring about something which was going to be honourable for everyone to sort this out. And he hasn't got the backing because no one else is making any noise on the subject because they're all distracted. He's a lone voice crying out quietly, without the amplification of a statement from the First Lord of the Admiralty and the First Sea Lord that the fleet is not just being retained from exercise, but is being mobilised. Without Lloyd George making one of his big fiery statements about peace in our time and about the brethren amongst men and how we need to come together to rise above these things. About Asquith making sending personal messages to the leaders of the nations involved, saying, I fully support my foreign minister's policies, and I will stand by them. And they don't. They don't. Yes, you can say, well, it's not really policy at this time. Usually the foreign minister takes lead. You'd be right. But again, if you look at the earlier scenarios, when we're talking about those earlier diplomatic ventures, again, what I just outlined would not have been unusual. It fits within that pattern. And that it's not taking place in 1914 is because they are focused on Ireland. Rightfully so. Ireland deserves focus. But the point is, if you're a government, you have to be able to focus on multiple things at a time. You can't afford your attention to be entirely upon one thing. What's even worse to realise is that it's July the 24th, in the afternoon cabinet meeting, when they've been focusing on talking about Irish Home Rule and the issues with that. And it's as they're getting up and finishing, Edward Grey calmly asks for just a few moments of everyone's time before they go to explain some small issues happening in the continent. And that's when he reads out the Austrian ultimatum. That's when he decides everything. And that's when suddenly Cabinet realises what's going on. the 24th of July. That's too little too late, isn't it? And we'll be discussing this all after the Shameless book plug. At this point, we are merely talking about the people involved and outlining them. And it's not just the politicians who are at fault. There are generals I can talk about, but I'm going to focus in on the usual principal methodology of British diplomatic signalling, the Navy, and the issues the Navy's currently having at this point. Now, at this point, you must be thinking, what are the Sea Lords doing? What are they doing? Well, they're trying to do their jobs, but they have a problem. Their intelligence estimates and their information is all being processed through a staff, which, as I've said before in other videos, is their intelligence staff. The Royal Navy, it's often misunderstood that the Royal Navy don't have a staff at this point. They don't have a central... They do. It's all the intelligence division of the Royal Navy, because instead of setting up a proper staff, it has evolved over time, and basically they started out with an intelligence section, and they've just expanded that. So now all the war planning, everything is going through an intelligence department. And that means that for them, secrecy is paramount. Secrecy is the sole thing that they are aiming for. Secrecy is what everything is about. And they work to that as a criteria. They work to that as a criteria, so much so that the Royal Navy really isn't very good at doing the loud signalling. And this was okay when you had a Fisher-style character as the first Sea Lord, because he was a loud, precocious personality anyway. He would do the signalling for you. There is a comment made by Andrew Lambert in his books that, no government advised by Admiral Fisher would have been so badly prepared for 1914. No government advised by Admiral Fisher would have been so bad at communicating as Fisher. And in many regards, that's because Fisher would have done the communication himself. The government would have been able to have been the nuanced people they had been, which Grey had done before, because Fisher would have provided the bombast. And it works. But the trouble is, in the government in 1914, there is no one to provide the bombast. There is no one who's looking like the cautionary tale. There's no one who is the loud, aggressive threat that they can go, look, in this way you can deal with me and my nice diplomatic words, or we let that thing out the cage. And that's something which is often misunderstood. Governments often have to play a game when it comes to foreign policy. They have to have someone who is sufficiently bellicose and aggressive that pretty much everyone's going, oh, not you again. But at the same time, they have to have that person so that everyone gets the idea that if they don't let diplomacy have a word, then there is something far worse to come. Now, this is an interesting thing because it doesn't strike an accord with most modern diplomacy. Basically, when we see it most often, it comes out of China today. It's called wolf warrior diplomacy. And basically, the whole idea is there are people putting out sufficiently aggressive statements that the slightly more conciliatory tone of the central government starts to sound sensible, and you want to work with them, because if you don't, look at who might be getting the words. And it's a key point of a multipolar world, of when you have multiple great powers, multiple centers of authority, that you do need this, because what often happened in the Cold War world was that the minor powers would sound more aggressive, so that the central power of each alliance could be the conciliatory one, or vice versa. They played off between nations. But that works well in a bipolar world, like the Cold War. But in a multipolar world, you have to have that within your own government. And that's a more complicated thing to balance. And the Liberal government had worked well with Fisher as First Sea Lord. Why? Because he'd been that. But he'd left in 1910, and Wilson, who had followed him, had not been the same public figure. And Bridgman, well, Bridgman was a nice enough man, but was realistically not who was needed at the time. He was a good man, but he was not who was needed at the time. Battenberg, well, he'd been chief of the intelligence division. He's a smart and capable leader. I will have an argument with anyone who wants to claim he's not. He is. He is not good at public relations. Otherwise, in the nicest way, when he saw the way things were going, he'd have sorted out his own name as an issue. He'd have never left him expose that. He is good at organisation. He is good. He is who you probably want as First Sea Lord in World War I is probably Battenberg, because he's probably the best the Royal Navy has at organising, understanding all the information of what's going on in the world, and understanding what's happening. But he's not who you need to deter war. In a system whereby it has grown up that the politicians do the peace and the sailors do the war. And even Churchill, who normally has fulfilled some of the bombastic role since he's taken over as First Lord of the Admiralty, has stepped up to that role, is distracted. And the trouble is, none of these men are going to fulfill that role because, well, Moore and Lambert are both good, but they're a third Sea Lord and fourth Sea Lord. They're rather far down the road. And honestly, what could they do? What could they do and what could they say? Jellicoe is second Sea Lord. He's more senior, but that's not Jellicoe's wheelhouse. That's not his methodology. That's not what he does. He won't do that. He won't make those big statements, even when he is in a political position to do so, and he is not that way inclined. In fact, as First Sea Lord, his position would probably be more secure if he had been more public and prolific in his statements, if he hadn't confined himself to sending memos which were trying to make his case to members of the House, to the government. If he'd actually gone on it publicly, he'd have probably won his argument. But he doesn't. And then Battenberg? Well, Battenberg is probably one of the best strategists. He writes the war plans for the Royal Navy. He's a former head of the intelligence division. He is one of the most organised, one of the most knowledgeable, well-versed naval officers Britain has had as First Sea Lord in generations at this point. And yet, he is terrible at PR. Because if he had an even ounce of it in him, he would have sort of seen this stuff coming and gone, what's going to be an issue? My name. I need to quietly change this before it becomes a problem. I need to quietly change this. Not wait for World War I to happen. Not wait for all the issues to be stormed up, but actually change it. He doesn't do PR. He doesn't do public relations. He was an head of intelligence division. They don't speak publicly. That's not their way. And that's the problem. The Royal Navy's gone from being headed by a showman to being headed by men of substance, yes, but not men of public. And the thing is, Fisher is also to blame for this. In multiple ways. Fisher has been grooming Churchill in so many regards, growing their friendship. But he sees this more as a way to return to First Sea Lord, similar to Beresford, his sparring partner, as a chance of war for them to return and get glory than necessarily something they're trying to avoid. And let's be honest, Fisher has consistently caused issues. In that, if we go back to the Bellerophon video, which I did not long ago on this channel, his overly conservative approach to construction, his overly conservative approach to procurement, has meant that the Royal Navy's lost the chance to really get ahead. There's half the reasons you have the naval race you do as a quantitative naval race versus the Germans, instead of them just joining into the qualitative race, which has virtually no heat in it. It's because Britain doesn't order enough ships early on in the race. Or rather, skips below what they normally do. They normally order 4 battleships a year. They normally order 4. And then suddenly they order 3 a year. And they drop down 3 units, and suddenly the Germans look like they're getting close. You have those 3 extra units. The Germans never get anywhere close. Because they don't have the infrastructure to do. And they're not going to get the funding to do that, because it'll take the money away from the army. You completely destroy the naval race if you don't penny pinch at the beginning. Add in a little bit more zoomp on the technology and, go for the 13.5-inch gun instead of the 12-inch gun. Go for the triple turrets instead of the twin turrets. Go for the super firing arrangement instead of the wing turret arrangement. There are all sorts of options you can go for instead of going for the Dreadnought as built. They don't. They don't. Even if you'd gone for the same guns, but you just had the super firing arrangement, you'd have increased the broadside from 8 to 10 guns. 8 to 10 guns. Doesn't sound like much. But suddenly the Germans and their design of their ships has to change, because they also go for an 8-gun broadside. Suddenly they have to work for a complete redesign of their hull shaping. And that takes up longer. All these things could have been done. But it wasn't. Because ultimately Fisher is a very conservative procurer. Despite his bombast, despite his desire to take leaps, he takes the most conservative leaps imaginable. And the fact is, the other problem you have going on in the Navy is it's still riven by the Fisher-Beresford Wars. And the one good thing you can say about the Beatty-Jellicoe issues towards the end of World War I and into the 20s and 30s, neither allowed the factionalism to start splitting the Navy. Any of their supporters looked like they were doing that, they would crush them first before they crushed anyone else. Before they got the chance. And they did. Because of these two men. Because of what they created. So you have a divided Navy with no bombastic person to sound the Calarian call and go, "Look, we're here!" When the Royal Navy is held back, and we'll get on to this point, from its exercise, it should have either been deployed straight away to a exercise in the North Sea or deployed up to Scapa Flow, anything to make a big statement. It's being deployed to its wartime positions. The Royal Navy is being put onto a wartime footing. Not we're simply retaining it from exercise. No, we're putting it onto a wartime footing until this crisis is past. You show a level of strength. The politicians usually can use the phrase, "We've been advised it's necessary because of the pace of events we need to do this. We'd rather it proved unnecessary, but we've been advised it's necessary caution at this current time." And they can smile while saying that. They could do. Not us. We've been advised to it, and national security comes first, but we'd rather prove that they were overreacting than anything else. But everyone knows the reality. Knows that if it's been formed up, if they've been put up position, no. That doesn't die. Instead, the Navy's already internally fighting. So we have a divided government fighting between different variations on whether or not they should honour secret letters from 1912 with the French. And we have a government, a navy, which is an instrument of that government, which is fighting over what they should do and is not making the statements they need to do because the people in charge, while being very good at their job, are not very good at their job. Or rather, they're very good at their job, they're not good at telling people they're very good at their job. And I'd also say the fact that This gets to this level of crisis. 24th of July. And no one here has yet broken the frigging news to Churchill about what's going on in the world. Worries me. Because either that means they haven't been informing him, or he hasn't been taking any notice. And my strong suspicion is it's a combination of both. Because he doesn't seem to want to meet with them, he wants to meet with Fisher. And Fisher is not playing a good game for Britain at this point. He's playing a game for Fisher, it seems, not for Britain. He's lost sight of the ball. It happens. People can confuse national interest with their personal interest. It can happen, but Fisher is not at his best at this point. Anyway, shameless book plug. And after this, we'll go through those few weeks where war turns from being unthinkable to being inevitable to being a foregone conclusion. But first we have the shameless book plug, which is the part where I tell you thank you for watching the video. If you like the videos, please do like, share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. This is my book, hence it's a shameless book plug. It's the book I have out currently. There are more books coming, but in the last couple of years I've been dealing with all sorts of weird things, including getting the channel going and work issues, but also moving house, which has taken over rather a large amount of my life. Oh, good God, it basically swallowed the last 18 months to 2 years of my life. You don't realise it till you go through it, and I will now forever have far more sympathy for people who are moving house than I have before, because traditionally I have literally been moving myself and just taking moving between uni accommodations. It's a few bags, it's my laptop, it's computer, laptop, and many boxes of books, and that's it. But it's usually a 2 or 3 carloads, and I just run it myself over a weekend or so, and of upping and downing, or maybe I rent a van and do it myself. Moving a whole family, moving all that stuff, oh my lord, the complications rise. So, yeah, thank you for all of you. Thank you for putting up with the stuff that's affected the channel in time, also the pneumonia and those things. Thank you for supporting the channel and helping it keep going, helping it grow. There is a lot more coming this year. There is going to be the Historiathon again in November, which is going to be 5 12-hour lives, Monday through Friday, and then a 36-hour live, Saturday through Sunday. Basically starting at 1200 hours on the Saturday and going through to 2400 hours or /000 hours Sunday, Monday, whatever you want to call it. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. I might be doing the 12-hour streams, 1300 hours to 0100 hours, rather than 12 till 12. Just because it makes life a little bit easier if I do, with walking dogs and things in the morning. But, it should be fun, and it is going to probably be, the plan I'm going to go is that the 5 weekday streams are going to be for charity, where any money raised them is going to go to charity, and the 36-hour stream is going to be for funding this channel and stuff for this channel. Like last year's one has paid for the pictures and things for the book, and the book that's going to be coming out this year. It's a case of this one is going to pay for probably next year's book, or possibly other things as well. We'll see what happens. There's going to be various things in there, so that's how I'm going to structure it. I think it's going to be fun. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and let's get back to, well, what can best be summed up and with the phrase, and then it got worse. To be fair to a war which seems to be stumbled into by communication errors, the spark that ignites it is started by a communication error, and it's a really silly one. So in the earlier morning, about about 1000 hours earlier time, there had been an attempt to bomb the Archduke's car, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, the dual monarchies, and they'd failed. They managed to hit the second car. In that car had been the aide of the person who was organising everything in terms of security of the trip. Erich von Merisi. It was his job to keep everything running, and he was in hospital. And so when they decide they're going to go visit the hospital, they decide they're going to not go through the centre of town, they're going to go by the straight route, which is slightly easier to secure. But no one tells the drivers this. And so this is why you end up with the Archduke being driven past an assassin who thought, "Oh goody, I have a second chance," and went for it. And stepping up onto the floorboard of the car and shooting them at point blank range. Point blank range. They are quickly rounded up. They are quickly, the assassins are quickly rounded up and all these things. But the link is made to Serbia. The link is made to the separatists. The link is made to the whole issues of the Balkans. And the world starts moving towards war. The heir and his wife are dead. As it was I think the phrase is morganatic marriage. His children weren't going to inherit it, so it merely sets up a bit of a succession crisis. A bit of a succession crisis, because there's who should theoretically succeed, who will actually succeed, and the politics of the dual monarchies. And realistically, it just gets worse from here. Between the 28th of June and the 6th of July, more decisions are made that are going to lead to World War I than probably anyone really should do. And if you consider the old view that you shouldn't make major decisions within 6 months of a personal bereavement or a major life moment because your views might be clouded, well, unfortunately, the people driving this bus, the Austro-Hungarians, are definitely bereaved and definitely making the decisions. And what's more important to realise is that in these days, we're talking about these 9 days, not a lot of other powers really get involved. Okay, there's presence for them, but France currently at this point has its president on a vessel coming back from Russia. He's sailing along. He's not really in touch and coordinating things. Britain, whilst they send their condolences, etc., and are looking at what's going on warily, then they don't really do much active, and it's Edward Grey till the 12th of July. So realistically, in this period, the most important foreign capital you have, other than Austro-Hungary, who are reeling from this, absolutely reeling from this, is Berlin. And the trouble is, that means Kaiser Wilhelm. And whilst his ambassador to Austria, Henrik von Schwersky, originally says that the Emperor Wilhelm II, would support resolute, well thought out, these sort of things, phraseologies, action with regard to Serbia. By the 4th of July, Wilhelm is sharing the news of the General Staff, which apparently felt that they would be pleased if war were to come about now, and was entirely for settling accounts with Serbia. In fact, he sends a note to Schwersky advising him to stop advocating for restraint. Drop this nonsense. We must finish with the Serbs quickly, now or never. So Schwersky goes to the Austro-Hungarian government goes to the emperor and says Germany would support the monarchy through thick and thin, whatever action it decided to take against Serbia. The sooner Austro-Hungary is struck, the better. And there you go. It's a blank check. Austria is reeling from personal loss, from upset, from pain. And now this. And now this. And there is a difference in relationships. There is a difference in relationships. And they even send officers from Austria-Hungary to Germany to ensure there's full support and to work out what's going on and make sure they're aligned. I think even the Austrians are kind of surprised at getting a completely blank check. Even it makes them think, go, what the frigate? And one does wonder whether Kaiser Wilhelm really appreciated this. I think it's important to consider again that he thought England, Britain, was completely distracted with what Ireland was going on. And I don't know if he really understood how far he was pushing the Austrians to go. I don't know if he thought they were just going to be annexing Serbia and whether Russia would accept that, because Russia's not going to accept that. And if Russia ends up in a war with them, then France is going to end up in a war with them. And if both Russia and France are in a war with them, then probably Britain's going to end up in a war with them. But because of the treaty system and the alliances that they're going for, Britain doesn't have an alliance formally with France and Russia. There is a treaty. There are letters. Secret letters. There is no public alliance. Britain only has one public alliance at this point, and that is the Anglo-Japanese alliance. They very nearly had two. In the 1890s, they'd been looking at Germany as probably their first ally. And then Germany had shot that in the foot by demanding too much. It's one thing to agree to an alliance of equals. It's another to agree to an alliance where they want to be the tail that's wagging the dog. And this was the problem. Germany was pushing things, but it's Kaiser Wilhelm who's pushing things realistically, because he's acting in a truly bombastic manner. And again, one of the problems you have is that the civilian government is being worked around by their own German general staff, the high staff, the senior staff officers. And the reason they're working around them is because they are looking at it as a war scenario. So one of the interesting things is that if you look at the Schlieffen Plan and all its things, it's concentrated on beating France and then beating Russia. Schlieffen Plan has nothing in it about beating Britain. The presumption is you beat the British Army, you win the war. Sure. And all the Navy has to do is keep the Royal Navy from interfering. But as we'll know from future points, the Army actually requests Tirpitz not do anything to interfere in the British Expeditionary Force being moved to Europe, because it's better to destroy them on land. That's why the Germans don't interfere, because they request not to. And the Royal Navy's sitting there going, we're all waiting here for you guys. None of you? None? No one's coming out? It's unlikely Tirpitz actually even wanted to get involved in it anyway, because he knew that the Royal Navy would be sitting there going, please do it. We'll move the people across in the channel, and then you can come and attack the channel, and then we'll swing in behind you and crush you. And you'll have a choice of either trying to race round the other side of Britain to get back to Germany and go up round north like a reverse armada, or get annihilated trying to fight through us to get home. That's the sort of scenario we're talking about. That's what the British were thinking about. But either way, between the 28th of June and the 6th of July, really, the British government don't do much. They don't see what's coming. They are too busy, too focused. Even Edward Grey, too busy, too focused. Now, whilst we often think about the ultimatums that fly at the beginning of World War One and how they lead to the war, there is actually a point where it could have been more interesting in rather of what it could have caused, because the Austro-Hungarians actually did debate in their Council of Joint Ministers a plan for a surprise attack on Serbia. They are persuaded not to. They are persuaded that that demand should be placed on Serbia, and before they mobilise, and there should be therefore provided a proper juridical basis for a declaration of war. Now that's an interesting phraseology. It basically comes down to this. The just war doctrine had started going around the world, and basically the just war doctrine at this point was about justification of war, not just justification. And the idea was if they could justify it, then they could probably limit who would get involved in the war, maybe even force the Russians to not get involved in the war, maybe the French wouldn't get involved in the war if the Russians did. You know, there are all sorts of options, but they want to keep allies on the side. There is the fact that the alliance with Italy is already weak. Let's be honest. In the Entente, it's Russia, Britain. Anglo-Russian relations are regularly interesting, despite the familial relations between the royal families. The governments really don't get on that well. And in the Triple Alliance, in their agreement, it's Italy, Austria. Frankly, the two do not get on. They have enough bad blood between each other. They are pretty much building their entire naval programs against each other, despite them being both part of the qualitative race from the quantitative race. And realistically, that is not necessarily a good relationship. So if you want to try and keep it on side, you need to provide justification. You need to provide justification. And so that is what they're doing. They are trying to push these things forward. At various points, the only one on the Austrian side who's actually opposed to war is István Tisza, who's the Prime Minister of Hungary. He seems to realise what's on the block. In fact, it could be the whole empire. And even Karl von Struck, the Prime Minister of Austria, is mainly hoping the criminal inquiry would provide a basis for action rather than dissuade action. They are looking for links with Serbia itself. They're looking for it being a state-sponsored event. And this is building up and continuing to build up. By the 8th of July, there's a message from Kaiser Wilhelm stating most emphatically that Berlin expected the monarchy to act against Serbia and that Germany would not understand it if the present opportunity was allowed to go by without a blow struck. This meant that for the Austrians, if they therefore offered any compromise or agreement with Serbia, Germany would see it as a sign of weakness, which could affect their position in the Triple Alliance or in Germany's future policy. Yes, things are being driven in the mind of Kaiser Wilhelm. And these two, Tsar Nicholas, honestly, who knows what he has going on at this point in his mind. But Emperor Franz Joseph, he's just furious with the world. He's in that mood where he wants to see the world burn. As old as he is, that's what he's in the mood for. And he's not getting in. The Kaiser Wilhelm is not pouring any water on that fury. The reasoning for this on the part of the Germans is simple. They perceived Russia as a growing power, despite the fact that they were still selling them weapons. They perceived them as a growing power whom the future belonged to. And that was an ever-increasing nightmare to them. And so taking the opportunity now to humble France while they could, that would secure their position for the future. That would secure Germany its rightful status in the world and its rightful position. And this is what is behind the German General Staff's appreciation, and probably what they're passing on to the Kaiser, and the Kaiser himself's bellicosity. It honestly is. On the 9th of July, they advise, and various others conclude, the necessity of presenting Belgrade, that's Serbia, with an ultimatum that was designed to be rejected. It was demands that no government could ever reach. No government could ever concede to. The idea was it would ensure a war without the odium of attacking Serbia without warning, and it was felt that that would mean that Britain and Romania would remain neutral. After all, Britain was stuck in its own little world at this point. And it's 3 days before the British start to actually really push diplomatic things and get involved, because in some regards, the British intelligence operation in Germany is not in the right place to pick up what's going on. It's one of those interesting things that when we consider this all, the British intelligence focus is on the Navy, and it's been on the naval side of German foreign policy. And whilst they're getting snippets of this coming through, there is no real central government intelligence organisation for Britain at this point, and the army intelligence is it's an interesting group. Realistically, the Naval Intelligence Division has been the only formal process of intelligence assessment. The Army has set up some staff since the Boer War, but they haven't got anything like any sort of program of information gathering going. And so, realistically, the Royal Navy providing the foreign intelligence in this scenario is getting snippets of what's going to the Navy of the German fleet, the Kaisermarine. But that's only getting snippets of what's actually being discussed. So the British are getting snippets coming through their intelligence briefings. And it's what their ambassadors managed to hear and glean, which is proving most important. And this is all going to Grey, who is, as of the 9th of July, saw no reason for taking a pessimistic view of the situation. And that's the actual phrasing he used to Prince Lansky, who's the German ambassador in London. Now, you can understand that he was saying that because he wanted to try and make things more peaceful. But the thing is, when you're sending messages like that through, then it's very easy for your opponent to get the wrong idea of what you're thinking. And it's one thing, if Grey was saying that whilst there was a First Sea Lord loudly advocating for full mobilisation of the fleet, or announcing that, exercises were going on and all sorts of things were happening, and there's going to be a very loud noise about what the Navy was getting up to, that might have sent the right message. They are doing the soft diplomacy. They're not doing the hard diplomacy. They're doing it straightforward. They're trying to do it by softly alone. And realistically, conflict management, deterrence, all these things, it's always, the phrase that tends to be used today is smart power. But what smart power is this revolutionary idea of you have the hard power doing something, i.e. your military forces doing something to demonstrate your willingness to do stuff, while your people who speak, i.e. your diplomats, are also saying something more softly. It's not so much new as they've put a new phrasing on it. It's basically just called diplomacy and the grand strategy and the art of diplomacy if we go back in time. But no, these days you have to call something soft power, hard power, and smart power. Because we all have to have a new phraseology for everything. But as it is, Well, you do have that game, though, being played by Wilhelm, by Germany, because whilst on the 10th of July they are drafting this ultimatum to Serbia, on the 11th of July, when the German Foreign Office asks the Kaiser should they send a telegram congratulating King Peter of Serbia on his birthday, Wilhelm replies that if they don't, that might cause suspicion. So, he carries on with it. They carry on. But the Germans are getting more impatient than the Austrians to see this ultimatum. But the Austrians themselves, and I know he said he's on a ship, but he's not on a ship yet, were deciding they wanted to present it to the Serbs after the Franco-Russian summit between Poincaré, President of France, and Tsar Nicholas was over. Now, Wilhelm was upset that this was going to be presented so late in July, but realistically the Austrians wanted it to be presented after that was over, so there wasn't a chance of joint action between the Russians and the French. If they are together, if the President and the Tsar are together in the same place, they can do joint action. This is actually a smart move on the part of the Austrians. But it also means why, when the crucial diplomacy comes in, when you need to do stuff after the ultimatum has been declared, Poincaré and a lot of his senior team are on a ship, heading back from Russia to France, i.e. not in good communication. Not in good communication. The Germans, especially Kaiser Wilhelm, are disappointed about this. But on the 14th of July, Ziersky reports to Berlin, this is the German ambassador to Austria-Hungary, that any ultimatum would be almost certainly rejected and should result in war. And this leads to the German foreign minister, Jagal, sending instructions to Prince Laszlo, who's the ambassador to Britain, stating Germany would be doing everything to cause an Austro-Serbian war, but Germany must avoid the impression they're egging on Austria to war. There are times in history, and when we're working history, where people don't like the idea of war guilt clauses. In World War I, whilst there are a lot of contributing factors which lead to the war, realistically, I'm sorry, Germany does get the war guilt clause. They are maybe not driving this train, but they're certainly powering it. They are propelling it forward as hard as they can because of their fear of Russia, because of their fear of the alliance system, because of their fear of everything. They are pushing it far harder than anyone should be. And you can maybe argue there was reasons for them to do that, and you can see their logic, but there is undoubtedly that they are pushing it. They are pushing it. And I'd argue in part they're pushing it because Britain at this point is asleep at the wheel. Britain, the power which could balance them out and could be going, excuse me, is doing nothing because they are not paying attention. This is why I talked earlier on about, the importance of opposition in the UK political system to the system of government. It's similar in international relations. When you have two major powers in a region, etc., they need to be paying attention to each other and they need to be able to push back at each other. Because if they don't, one of them will go rampant and do stupid things. Because they're humans and because there's no police force. There's nothing for international relations for people to appear to. It's just nations fighting nations. It's anarchy with nice meetings and fancy dinners. It really is. And they fundamentally believe, the Germans do at this point, that if they do not fight the war against Russia at this point, then in a few years Russia will be ready. Their railways will be ready. Their Baltic fleet will be ready. Their land numbers will be reformed, and they will crush them. That their alliance is inevitably growing weaker and weaker and less united, and if they don't do something now, they will never have a chance. Of course, that is based on the presumption that eventually there would be a war anyway between Germany and Russia. That's based on, the thing is, any assumption like that is based on the fact there's an inevitability of conflict between the two. Although it gets worse when you realise that this is basically dressed up quite constantly in German discussions and papers about it as inevitably there being a race war between the Teuton and Slavic races. And that is what they are thinking about, thinking in terms of. It is very much a race conflict that they are thinking of as being inevitable between the two for control of the world. And they don't really include the democracies in this because they don't perceive that any of the democratic powers being strong enough for such a war. They'd be crushed under their own democracy. They've been crushed under their own hypocrisy, under their own words. The fact that they can't really sustain such things. Something which, honestly, if there would have been a historian in the room, I'd have pointed out, well, hang on, didn't Napoleon used to say that about Britain and a few other these powers? Regularly they said that they'd be crushed because they are democratic and we are strong and authoritarian. But yeah, that never dawns on them. It really doesn't. And during this time, from basically the 10th to almost the 19th, even 20th, the Austrians keep reworking the ultimatum to make it tougher, to make it harder, to make it stronger, to guarantee the Serbs will reject it. And they keep being egged on by the Germans, demanding they finish it sooner, put it together sooner. And then we start to see a misstep. And this is certainly something which should have percolated straight through to being told to the British Cabinet. This is something which should not have waited days to be told to the British Cabinet. It should have been told immediately. Because on the 9th of July, Jagau, that foreign minister of Germany, publishes a note. It's in the North German Gazette, which is the semi-official publication of the German Reich. And this note says that the settlement of differences which may arise between Austria-Hungary and Serbia should remain localized. Okay, that means other powers should keep out of it. Immediately, the French ambassador to Germany, Jules Camon, asks how Jagau knows of the contents of the Austro-Hungarian ultimatum. Jagau pretends to be ignorant of it. But Horace Rumbold, the British ambassador to Berlin, reports it's likely that Austria-Hungary is operating with German assurances, and this should have gone straight up. All this stuff should have gone straight up to a cabinet meeting. It should not have been 5 days away. It should have been 19th of July. Hang on, what the frigate is going on? But it doesn't. Grey is still trying to sort these things out. He's still believing that the German ambassador to Britain, he's still believing that the German ambassador to Britain is being an honest broker with him and is telling him everything. Prince Lenowski. And Lenowski is a good diplomat, but he's a loyal diplomat, and he's always going to put his country and its needs first. He's not going to tell you anything he's not supposed to. Grey puts entirely too much emphasis on the fact he's friends with these diplomats. He sees them as friends. He sees the relationship he's built up with them as one of friendship, and it probably is. But they're professionals first, friends second. They have a professional relationship over and above and before they have a personal one. And you should never believe that your personal relationship will trump the professional one. But Grey is giving it that level of import, that level of weighting, and it takes days for him to let those scales fall from his eyes. And that is possibly what undermines his diplomacy at this point. But the fact is, again, there's no one else in the British government getting involved at this point. We're talking 19th of July. We're talking Grey has been involved in this now, has been getting in, pushing ideas in for about 7 days. And trying to get diplomatic going, but basically nothing is happening. Nothing is happening, nothing can happen. On the 20th of July, the German government informed the Norddeutsche Lloyd and Hamburg America Line to try and get their ships back to Germany before any war begins, and that the Kaiserlich Marine needs to concentrate on the High Seas Fleet in case of general war. This takes place on the 20th of July. This is 13 days before the Royal Navy would be ordered to remain mobilised after an exercise, and 16 days before the Royal Navy would officially begin general mobilisation. So, more than 2 weeks before the British are going to respond to this event. Think about that. At this point, they are in a quantitative race with the Germans for a dreadnought race. It's over, but they have been in one for a while. It's only over now because basically it's been defeated by the British ordering so many Queen Elizabeths and raising the costs, and then ordering so many R-class that they've really hammered nail, and the Germans just can't match up. The Baden class are closer to ours than they are Queen Elizabeths, and they're just not building enough of them. They're just not building enough. They're not. They've lost the race because, again, the race was becoming so expensive. It was starting to interfere with the army's budget, and that meant immediately the Kaiserlich Marine went, "You've lost your budget." The moment the cost starts to get to a level that interferes with the army's budget, that's when they lose the naval race. But now we are on the 19th of July. We're on the 20th of July, and these forces are moving towards these things, and the British heads firmly in the sand. They don't realise anything's going on realistically. Again, the mobilisation, the organisation of these fleets, those were picked up by the Royal Navy. That was picked up very quickly. And again, they are trying. That stuff we do know is trying to go up and is being ignored. It's one of the reasons, though, why Churchill was prepared to make his offer on the 2nd of August, is because the Royal Navy's been badging him about it for the last few days. And he's been taking no notice. And he never puts it together with, it seems, with what's going on in Austria-Hungary. It never sees what's going on in Serbia at this point. He doesn't put it together. At this point, well, 21st of July, the German government call in Cambon, that French ambassador in Berlin, and Brodsky, the Russian charge d'affaires, their ambassador, and told them they had no knowledge of what the Austro-Hungarian policy was towards Serbia. They tell them that. They are playing the diplomatic game. Playing it well. On the same day, well, several Germans are noting that the Austro-Hungarians seem almost sorry that Germany had given them such a blank check, instead of advising sensible actions and restraint. They're given a blank check, and now the Austrians themselves are feeling themselves forced into a corner they don't want to be forced into, but they're going down that road because they can't for fear of losing face. Fear of losing face. They're so worried about this, they try to suggest that they want the German ambassador in Belgrade, the German ambassador to Serbia, to present the ultimatum to Serbia. And it's refused because, as Chagall points out, it would have looked too much like they were egging Austria on. And of course, they had been, but they didn't want the world to perceive it as such. But by this point, German diplomacy is starting to slip. German diplomacy is starting to slip. And, well, 9th of July, there had been a flurry of communications going out already. You know, I've already talked about some of them, but Chagall had sent a note to the ambassadors saying they fully supported action against Austro-Hungarian action against Serbia and to push that, but then realizing later on that before it gets submitted on the 23rd, that it would make him look like they knew what was going on. They instead claim total ignorance, but threatening calculable consequences if any power tries to stop Austro-Hungary from attacking Serbia should the ultimatum be rejected. And it's on the 23rd of July that the ultimatum is presented. The ultimatum is presented. Now, while all this was going on, of course, Russia and France have been having their meeting. Ponthier had gone there to, as Christopher Clarke, as he puts it, to preach the gospel of firmness. And this, in the context of Serbia, meant intransigent opposition to any Austrian measures. And as such, the Franco-Russian alliance was firmer than it had ever been at this point. Firmer. On the 21st of July, the Russian foreign minister had warned the German ambassador to Russia that, well, Russia wouldn't be able to tolerate Austro-Hungary's using threatening language to Serbia or taking military measures. After all, it was just some independent agitators, it wasn't the government. Why should you do this? Berlin had discounted this threat of war. Chagall had noted that it was blustering from St. Petersburg. And this is the other problem. Every sign the Germans can possibly see in other people of not going to war, they accept as being them not going to war. Any sign where the others are going, look, we'll go to war if you do this. Oh no, they're joking. They're not real. They're not serious. They're not being serious. And this only gets worse from the 24th of July onwards, because the 24th of July is when the British really start to get involved. As said, there is a meeting. And there's this lovely quote in Massey's Dreadnought book, that Robert K. Massey's Dreadnought, that I can find, but I haven't. I know I've got it in a book from Churchill elsewhere, and I couldn't find it, so I knew it was in here, so I looked it up in this book. It's page 879. Gray had been reading or speaking for several minutes before I could disengage my mind from the tedious and bewildering debate which had just closed. Gradually, as the phrases and sentences followed one another, impressions of a wholly different character began to form in my mind. The parishes of Fermanagh and Tyrone faded back into the mists and squalls of Ireland, and a strange light began immediately, but by perceptible graduations, to fall and grow upon the map of Europe. Asquith termed the Austrian ultimatum the greatest event for many years past in European politics, as it may be the prelude to a war in which at least 4 of the great powers may be involved. He wrote to Venetia Stanley, "We are within measurable, or imaginable, distance of real Armageddon. Happily there seems to be no reason why we should be anything more than spectators." In 1905, 1908 and 1911, Europe had approached the brink of war, and they had managed to avoid it. And this is what the British leadership were banking on. They looked around Europe and they thought Europe was tranquil at this point. And it wasn't. It just was not. And, well, when Britain offers to mediate, when Britain offers to put that through, because of this response, basically the idea is we'll try and mediate. And again, in here there is an excellent section. It goes on for a few pages of what Britain's offering, what Linowski's reporting, and what the Kaiser's comments are. And it's a wonderful section in Massey's book to read. And it leads to various phrasings from the Kaiser, who as ever is mild-mannered and, level-headed. Oh no, he's not. He basically decides that it means they will attack us. He believes their mind is already made up. Now, again, I can point to the fact that the British government are really in not a prepared state. He goes from almost believing that Britain will never get involved to Britain's just always was going to get involved and was always going to be hardliners. It's really wonderful watching how quickly he changes when you read the works and you read the papers. Kaiser Wilhelm basically jumps from one extreme to the other extreme in minutes. And again, if you look at the British, this is till the 31st of July. To the 31st of July. The Royal Navy is not mobilised. It's not even. There's a bit of an exercise just about to start, but it's not there. Britain's not mobilised. If Britain's mind was already made up, they'd already be mobilising, like Germany's doing at this point. But it's not. There was every chance of Britain being a spectator at this point. The major thing that Grey keeps coming back to is he wants guarantees for Belgium, and he wants no German fleet going down the channel. They don't, to their view, they're not involved in an offensive war. Their mind, they've got agreements with Russia and France to an extent on the Entente, but if those two aren't actually attacked, if they go on the offensive, are not actually attacked, then Britain, as far as they're concerned, don't need to get involved. They don't really see why they should get involved if there's a dispute over Serbia going on. They'd like to peace, they'd like to have a six-power agreement, they'd like to have a conference, they'd like to stop this from breaking out. But you can understand Asquith thinking he's going to be on the sidelines, and yet the document which is sent through the notes, the offers of this meeting, is taken by Wilhelm to suddenly turn the British from not going to get involved to they're already made up their minds to get involved. And then you start seeing the pursuit of things as it starts pushing down that path, as it starts going down that path, and you start to realise the importance of the fact that history can be defined and decided by 1 square foot of real estate, and that's in the mind of someone who has the power to influence it. It gets even more apparent that there are many forces at play in Germany on this when we consider that the note which Grey tries to send to Austria offering to mediate, and of course it's actually held up in Berlin by Jagau, and as he doesn't pass it on till after the ultimatum had expired, to sabotage it. When Wilhelm gets told of how the people in Belgrade are taking the ultimatum, are taking the choice of war or national annihilation, well, he writes on his report in his usual style, "Bravo! One cannot have believed it of the Viennesi," i.e. of the Austro-Hungarians. "How hollow the Serbian power is proving itself to be. Thus it is seen to be of all Slav nations. Just tread hard on the heels of that rabble." Yes, one of the people who was most obsessed with the joy of the powerful Teuton is Wilhelm himself. And by the way, that excellent quote comes from David Fromkin's book, Europe's Last Summer, Why the World Went to War in 1914. It's a good read. It is a very, very good read. Like Massey and Andrew Lambert's Admirals. There are a few good reads to try and understand the mess that is 1914. But it is a mess, and that is the first thing you need to understand it. Don't go into it thinking there's going to be any real plan or understanding of anyone. They stumbled into war. And they stumble into war because a lot of people are asleep at the wheel. And because the people who are powering it are not driving it, and they don't realise they're not driving it. And as these things start going, everyone starts to mobilise. France starts to mobilise, Russia starts to mobilise, all the nations start to mobilise and start diplomatically manoeuvring. Grey is trying to take a lead in terms of bringing about peace. The British government are now waking up and trying to push for peace, and they are failing because it's too late. Everyone's already preparing for war. Austria is making their final preparations on the 27th of July. They are as ready as they are ever going to be, and they declare war on Serbia at 1100 hours on the 28th of July. It's history, and it's the starting of the war, but still people think they can bring about peace. And to this we add on the fact that all the other negotiations going on. King George V trying to negotiate with everyone to bring about peace, and some of the stuff he was taking, and it is completely taken out of context, because often both Britain and Germany at certain points are pushing a stop in Serbia line. stopping Belgrade line for the things. But the thing is, the stop in Belgrade doesn't tend to reach the Austrians in time, and also never really joins up. There are options out there. There certainly are options for peace even at this point, but there's also willful belief of wrong things. Prince Henry of Prussia. I said Russia. The Kaiser's brother, who's an excellent naval officer, he interprets the calls for peace by King George V and the telegrams going back and forth as Britain would remain neutral. And this leads to the Kaiser being certain he doesn't need to bother about Britain because they're going to be neutral, because he'd been promised by the king they'd be neutral, completely ignoring the fact that the king doesn't have control of foreign policy. He has a lot of influence, but he doesn't have direct control of foreign policy. He's another avenue for foreign policy, for diplomatic relations, etc. But the government runs the country. And at the same point, we have various things going. Churchill finally, writing, and this is very late in this, that the RN was to be placed upon a preparatory precautionary basis. The fact he's announcing this internally to the king in such phraseology is immaterial. But the fact is also it's too late. This is taking place on the 28th, 29th of July. It's too late. And it's not till the 2nd of August it's actually started properly. And it's not until the 5th of August it's actually done openly. That's way too late. There were potentials of an agreement, potentials of some things going on the 27th, 28th of July. If the fleet had been mobilised before then, or been announcing mobilisation before then, they might have led to something. That might have gone, well, hang on, the British do seem serious. Okay, so maybe we should start thinking this out. But it's now getting too late, and the pace is just increasing and increasing and increasing. There is also the fact that by this point, Moltke is running the show more than the Chancellor. The Chancellor might still be the Chancellor, but he's trying to get naval agreements with Britain. He's trying to get all sorts of things to keep Britain and out of the war, to stop in Belgrade, and he's being sabotaged by Moltke. The show has been taken over by the General Staff of the Army. It's being run. The politicians might as well not be there. They are mouthpieces for the generals by this point in Germany and the Kaiser, and everything's running. Everything is running for it. It's also at this point that the Germans start saying it's not just about, preserving their position against Russia. It's the only way they can save Austria-Hungary as a great power is by a general European war, because only that will combine nations. They've been so split by the dual monarchy system and are so split again. Again, it's their perceptions of the world. And by this point, Britain had started to have serious meetings. And eventually you have a meeting between Prince Lalski, the ambassador in Britain, and Grey. And you pretty much have Britain Grey declaring, that if Germany attacks France, Britain would have no other choice but to intervene. And if they were to attack Belgium, Britain would have no choice but to intervene. And if they send a navy into the Channel, they'll have no choice but to intervene. And eventually, they've lost off the attack on Russia from that group. And eventually it's going to even be France is going to be dropped off that group. But it's literally going to be, we have two requirements to stop us getting involved in this war. You don't go into the Channel, and you don't go into Belgium. Break either of those, we enter the war. But the von Schieffelin plan was all about going through Belgium. So that's what they're doing. And what's funny is, in their diplomatic meetings, the British soon work out the Germans are planning to go through Belgium. They know. This is the thing. The Germans tried to be very good. Oh, we won't do this, and we promise to honour Belgium's independence after the conflict's over. So you're going to go through Belgium. You go through, and this is what's going backwards and forwards, and the British government are starting to pick this up on. But now they are too late. They are behind the curve. There is virtually nothing they can do to try and wrest control this. They are trying to diplomatically sort things out, but as most people will admit, that after the 28th of July, there's not really much chance anymore. There really isn't. And by the 30th of July, the Russians are generally mobilizing. And, well, it just gets worse from there. And with that, the Germans then threatened that if Russia doesn't stop mobilizing, they will mobilize. And this is the point where realistically everyone knows war is coming. War is going to happen soon. There is almost no chance of stopping it. No chance of stopping it. And that's the problem. That is a colossal problem, because you shouldn't know war is coming. It should be possible to stop it. There's also some timelines with various telegrams coming in going, oh, well, this is why this is paused and this is paused. If a telegram comes in and another one's sent out within 12 minutes, trust me, it won't have gone through all levels of leadership for things to be changed. It's not going to happen. With any telegram, any piece of information coming in, don't expect it to change things for at least an hour in terms of stuff going out, because once it comes in, it's then read and it's debated and discussed and analysed, and then they make a decision, and then that's got to be written and taken. You're not getting that done. So there are various theories which come on, in this period about how if things had worked, things were looking better, and we take this one comes in 12 minutes, and then this one goes away and it goes out, and all this. It's not going to be that quick. It just isn't. Just think about it in terms of your own work life. Okay, your own life. You get a message come in, and if it involves multiple people, and multiple people have to be involved in decision making, maybe to provide information. There's only one person's got to make a decision. Multiple people have got to have the information and analyse and be able to offer their points. How quickly do you manage to respond? How quickly do you manage to get those people together, them all to read it, them all to take it down, and then respond, and then to agree a response? It's not going to be 12 minutes. It's not. It's wishful thinking in some regards, because people would like there to be more share to go around of the blame. And I can understand, and everyone does have a portion. I would say the British problem in this scenario, and the British cause in the scenario, has started years ago, and it's been ineffectual signalling for the previous 10 years almost. They haven't been doing good diplomacy, and since Fisher's gone as First Sea Lord, it's just got worse. And that's one of the problems you have, a major problem you have with the whole system going on. I'd argue also their lack of engagement. I'd say for the Germans, it's not understanding exactly what kind of thing they're letting out the bag. They think they can control what's coming out the bag. They think they can open up the bag of war and they can let out exactly what the conflict they want, and nothing else. And that's not the way it goes. You can't control war. It's a tiger. Once it leaks out the bag, you can't stop it. You can't control it. And we go through the rest. The French, as said, Bondier is the French president is just not there. When he gets back, gets involved and tries to do things. The French are trying to do stuff, and the Austro-Hungarians, well, the moment they start to calm down from their fury, they start to realise the position they've been backed into. And of any nation, they will suffer the most from World War One. They will be the ones who will be absolutely destroyed. Of the powers, they are the ones who are most wrecked by it. And they were in many ways just a pawn in this game. And then Germany declares war on Russia, France and Belgium. Whilst the British, in response to the German declaration of war, promised that they would protect the French coast from German attack, but, you know, this is the 2nd of August, they're promising that. They're promising no more. Paul Cambon believes that this means that inevitably Britain will follow, their army will follow to war. It wasn't necessarily the case. There was a good possibility of it, but it wasn't necessarily the case. But on the 2nd of August, Germany took control of Luxembourg, and then on the same morning they declared war on Russia, and then they delivered an ultimatum to Belgium on the 2nd of August, demanding passage for Germany through to France. King Albert refused. Albert refused. And it's really interesting to consider. Lloyd George, all these other members of Parliament, all these people who were opposed to war on pretty much every other ground apart from German invasion of Belgium. Why? So it's because they understood the reality. There is a reason why Belgium was neutral. There's a reason why Belgium was created, it was allowed to carried on, was not swallowed up by a bigger power, and why nations signed treaties to protect its rights. I said, it's a key pivot point in Europe. And it was understood. It's weird to say Britain goes to war to defend Belgium neutrality. They don't. They go to war to defend British interests, which, if Belgium is no longer neutral, if Germany decides to keep control of Belgium, far more difficult for Britain to get control of Belgium back. If Belgium had decided to let the Germans through, and there was a fair number of people who thought Belgium might do that, then the British would not have got involved. On that circumstance, they couldn't. And this is in many ways why you could put the blame for British involvement in World War One on King Albert of Belgium. But realistically, he's standing up for his own nation because he has no guarantee the Germans will leave. He has no guarantee. And so when they issue an ultimatum, he refuses. And so, on 3rd of August, Germany declares war on France. On the 4th of August, they declare war on Belgium. And when Wilhelm Holweg tells the Reichstag that the invasions of Belgium and Luxembourg are a violation of international law, but it was in a state of necessity, and necessity knows no law. That's a great phrase. Yes, there might be international laws, but they're only for when things are nice and easy. The moment things are difficult, we don't have to borrow, and we don't have to follow them. At 1900 hours on the 4th of August, Britain sends an ultimatum to Jagow, demanding that by midnight, that is 2400 hours or 0000 hours on the 2400 hours on the 4th, 0000 hours on the 5th of August, that Germany goes no further with their violation of Belgian neutrality. Jagow rejects it immediately. The British demand their passports and requests a meeting with Wilhelm Holweg, who invites them to the ambassador to dine with him. Wilhelm Holweg then accuses Britain of going to war for its own national agenda. He quotes various parts of Grey's speeches, and even said that the 1839 Treaty of London was for Britain, not for Germany. A scrap of paper. What is always interesting in this entire scenario is how well each nation can see their own interests but not acknowledge those of others. Honestly, the only person who comes out of this entire period of history, this entire thing, with a scrap of understanding of what their opponents are after is probably Grey. Probably Grey. Even then, it's limited. And this is the problem. They're all thinking about themselves. They are, in business terms, they're selfish salesmen. Now, you can sell to a single client. You know, you can build a one-off transaction relationship being a selfish person. You can go, I'm just going to tell you all the good points of this product, and I'm going to sell you on it and get you to take it, and then you're going to go away and I don't care. Or you can try and build a long-term relationship, in which case you go, well, these are the good points of this product, and this is how it fits you, but this is the ways it won't fit you, because it's bad points. So maybe you want us to consider a different product, or I think this on average is probably to go okay with you, but it's okay if you're going to live with these things. Now, I have to admit, I have occasionally dabbled in working in sales in my youth, and with companies advising them on sales strategies. And it's always a case of, do you want to make a buck and a quick win, or do you want to have long-term success? And if it's the latter, then you have to go with the latter option. You have to understand who you're talking to and what they're interested in. And the thing is, yes, the Treaty of London is a scrap of paper. Yes, it is British national interests. But you're going to war for your national interests. Why do you expect Britain to not do the same? And that treaty has existed for, by this point, nearly 65 years, for a reason. Again, it's been important to Britain for 65 years. It's an actual Treaty of London, it's called. Britain arranged and organised the whole treaty. So, why? That treaty is actually older than Germany is, as a state. It predates their existence by 27 years. It's a mutable part of British strategic considerations. It's a terrible thing to say, but the war was not likely. In terms of Britain versus Germany, it could have been avoided. But the Schlieffen Plan required the German troops for a quick war against France. And the only way you could get a quick war was to go around their defences. And to go around their defences, the only way you could do was go through, well, Belgium or the Channel. I honestly think they'd have been more likely to get away with going through the Channel than through Belgium. The Channel, Britain could kid itself it let them through. Going through Belgium is, well, it's leading to potentially a permanent occupation of a very important piece of soil for Britain. And the trouble is for Britain also in this whole scenario is if Britain wins the war, then Britain could be left without any allies and facing now a Europe united against them. That's the other thing which Germany doesn't think about. That's the position they're putting Britain in. Britain's got to be dependent upon Germany's friendship. Do you trust the friendship of a nation led by Kaiser Wilhelm II? Would you? With that all being said, I always finish these videos actually, off with a question for the audience to think about. And I don't think probably I need to with this one to spark conversation, but I'm still going to put in a question. With the very real term and phrasing that, Germany was worried that by the time Russia completed their rearmaments program in 1917, they'd no longer be able to fight them. Do you think even if Britain does manage to significantly mobilise earlier, let's say they send the fleet to full alert 24th of July, when they first have that meeting, Cabinet's first instructions are mobilise and fully organise the fleet and go to full war alert, and send out a message saying we expect this to be negotiated, this to be a negotiated conference to discuss this process. We invite all, and sent it to everyone at the same time. Sent everyone a telegram inviting them to such a conference. Publicly. A public telegram. Gone the thermonuclear diplomatic route. What do we think happens? Myself, I don't think it differs much, because I think the reason why Germany is going to war is because they think they can win at this point. And I think all of Wilhelm's retorts of things like, to think that George and Nicky should have played me false. If my grandmother had been alive, she would never have allowed it for them to go to war, is absolute twaddle. It's him pontificating for the sake of pontificating. He wanted a war with Russia. He wanted a war with the Slavs to show them who was boss. He might be upset that George is also going to war against him, but in the nicest way, he was given outs at several points, and his government has ignored them. Britain probably wouldn't have bothered. And I say this with all due respect to the people who died, the war that happened. If Germany hadn't gone through Belgium, if Germany hadn't gone into the Channel, if Germany had kept to not invading France, it just literally held them off and beaten up Russia, Britain probably wouldn't have done that much. Because honestly, it was a Serbian issue, and the British public and the British political class had no appetite for a general European war. As we'd already discussed, they were focused on internal issues. They had issues of empire, of dominion to sort out. They had issues of Ireland to sort out. They did not need this at this point. They did not have the capacity to deal with it properly. But this is what was found. It meant that the Liberal Party was united. They'd been divided. They would have been... A war for war's sake would have divided them. They would never have been able to make it fly, but war for the sake of Belgium worked. But I'd be interested to hear what you say. If Britain does a full mobilisation on the 24th of July, what happens? What happens? And that being said, what we've got coming up? Well, next week we have the École Naval, the French naval school, and how they teach their students. Because I don't know, this is the year of leadership, so I'm looking at some of the leadership academies. Thank you very much for watching. If you like the video, please do like, share, and subscribe, and help the channel grow. It'd be really nice for you. And hope you find it interesting. And again, I'll really recommend Massey. It's okay, I don't agree with all the analysis, but there again, show me a historian who agrees with any other historian's analysis in the whole way through their books. We just don't. But I do think it's a very well written book, and it's got a very nice timbre to it to read and understand the flow of events. It does give you good details. There are some other good ones as well around. There's Nicholas Rogers' The Price of Victory, and Andrew Broyd's British Naval Intelligence throughout the 20th century. They're good books. All my very good books. Worth reads. Worthwhile reading. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Owen. Andrew Lambert Amros. Always got to recommend my old prof. Take care.